And now, my brethren, join me as we pray. Our Yugi Jesus, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your meta come, your plays be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our larvae moth, and forgive us our salt, as we forgive those who rage against us. Lead us not into scrubbiness, and deliver us from lucksacks. For thine are the cyber dragons, the larvae moth, and the Jerry Beans man, now and forever. Amen. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is Craft of the Cards. This series is fundamentally focused on grading the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, looking at the aesthetics of the art, how it syncs up to the effect, and how it relates to the card's name. We work through the archetypes in alphabetical order, starting off at a random point, which in this case was U. While we've previously graded cards out of 5, with 5 being excellent and 1 being a waste of cardboard and man-hours, this week, and for the foreseeable future, we'll be transitioning to a 10-point scale, mostly because it allows me to be a lot more granular. Once again, and the general bands for this might change around a bit as I settle into it, 1 to 3 will be terrible cards, 4 to 6 will be average or good cards, and 7 to 10 will be pretty excellent cards, all things considered. This week, we'll be moving into some fairly heavy lore, with Vylons being a part of the second generation of Duel Terminal storylines. In Duel Terminal lore, they were placed on the world by constellars in the ancient past in order to help combat the Steel Swarm menace. They rose into the story of the Duel Terminal world, where the Gem Knights and Laval tribes had started to fight each other, and when the Steel Swarms were eventually released by Noelia, combined with many of the other tribes to combat them. Unfortunately, while they did a good job initially, Noelia, acting on behalf of the Steel Swarms who had corrupted her, managed to infiltrate the Vylon mine network and corrupt them in turn. They were eventually defeated by a combined alliance of the other tribes, but not before causing serious damage. This archetype in general is pretty aesthetically pleasing, reminiscent of angelic beings with the white and gold, with a nice mechanical twist, hinting at their created nature. They also have some pretty excellent themes that go throughout their cards, so without further ado, let us discover the angles within our angels and take a look at Vylons. Vylon Sphere is their first monster, and is really cute. The big round blue eyes and the tiny stubby hands all work to give this card a sense of innocence, amplified further by the rounded design. The colors on this and almost every other Vylon card work well, the gray, white, and gold working together to make an interesting color palette, while the blue breaks it up every now and again. The background is really nice as well. The white clouds and bands of light emanating off the monster all help to create a sense of angelic innocence, which works well with the general theme of the archetype. In the lore, this combined with Ree's Whirlwind of Gusto in order to make Digustos freeze. The effect is nicely linked, allowing you to equip it to another monster, making sense given its relative size and fragility when compared to some other Vylon monsters, and its replacement ability goes to display the fact that it is a very modular sort of being. It's a decent enough card, and to christen the new 10-point scale, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Nothing too spectacular, while still keeping in theme with the rest of the archetype. Their next monster is another tuner, and in keeping with the theme of the non-synchro monsters having names related to geometry, we have Vylon Tetra, its name an obvious reference to a tetrahedron. The palette for this card is somewhat different to Sfree's, and for good reason. It's spikier and slightly bulkier, and therefore the orange helps to lend the card a more aggressive tone as a whole. While the clouds are still present, indicating an angelic theme, we see the card is defined by the orange background and gems, and the rays of lights coming from below help to make it seem more imposing, with the monster seeming to rise up menacing rather than just bouncing along like Sphere. I like how even the eyes are changed, cut into half moons by the top of the card, and the gold tracery around the card helps to highlight this, cutting off the eyes from the rest of the body. The surrounding of black steel helps as well, drawing attention to it, and I like how even the arms are changed from the sphere, becoming harder edged and more conventionally dexterous. It's a fairly standard effect for the equipped monsters, allowing you to equip it back to a monster that was maybe used to synchro summon and then protect it from there. The attack and defense values maybe also have a reference to the shape, it being a number of vertices and sides and a triangle multiplied against each other, then by 100 in order to get the 900 attack and defense. It was fused with Gishiki's Soul Ogre in the lore to form Gishi Tetrogre. What's particularly interesting about that fact is that the Gishiki's monster minus the level of Vylon Tetra equals 6, being the level of Gishiki Tetrogre. It's a nice touch that bumps the card up enough in my eyes to give it a 7 out of 10. While the card isn't anything spectacular, it does enough to start hitting the upper echelons of card design, both in terms of how it chooses to theme itself and things like the references to the geometry and the attack defense spread. Vylon Cube is their next card, shaped somewhat unsurprisingly by its name, its attack and defense values matching the number of vertices for a cube, and it's mostly just decent. Nothing too special to see here aside from the usual features of Vylon tuner monsters, diminutive size, colored gems, and funky looking heads. I'm not as much of a fan of the color scheme this time around, lacking the innocence of the pale blue or the aggressiveness of the orange. It's just somewhat sickly, all pale green. It clashes with the orange gem in the chest, as well as the yellow light it seems to be trying to protect. I used the word sickly earlier to describe it, and it really can't be said to be anything else, a weirdly ugly, vomit-looking filter over what otherwise might be a very nice card. The effect is really nice this time around, allowing the box to open up when sent to the graveyard for summon in order to reveal an equip card. That saves it from a lesser score, but in the end it gets a 4 out of 10. Nothing that really pushes it down into a tier of terrible cards that populate the 1, 2s, and 3s, but it's very, very clearly on the lower side of average, mostly due to the unfortunate color scheme and filter. Vylon Stella, on the other hand, is an absolute joy to look at. The name being Latin for star, the monster closely resembles it, with points sticking out at the corners and surrounded by golden halos. I love the design, so alien and ethereal. The deep purple of the sky behind it allows for a greater sense of mystery, not low in the atmosphere like Sphere is, but high beyond the clouds, zooming through the air. The emanations of force behind it seem to be a little oddly placed, almost off-center of the back of the card, which is slightly annoying. The best thing about this card, though, has to be the glow, a reference to the name and, stars shining brightly in the night. The other Vylon cards lacked it somewhat, but Stella, quite fittingly, has the subtle luminescence to it that makes it fit the name so perfectly. The color palette of the card itself is also really nice, the bright yellows going well with white even if it does make the gold look a tad tarnished. It's an excellent looking card, though its effect is somewhat disappointing. I like that, similar to all the Vylon tuners, it can equip itself to another monster in order to give it better effects, made all the more relevant by this theoretically combining with Laval Cannon to create Laval Stenon, but the destruction effect really doesn't make a lot of sense for me. You could argue that since it's like being in the presence of a star, and considering that stars are basically just one massive explosion going on in space, then yeah, okay, it makes sense for it to have an aggressive effect, but it seems to lack a lot of the aggressiveness in the art that would warrant such a thing. The attack defense spread is also interesting this time though. While it lacks the connection with the vertices and attack values that other monsters have, the 200 defense links it explicitly to Laval monsters. Overall, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Above the norm enough for me to appreciate it, but with enough flaws that I'm not willing to give it a higher score. Their next monster, Vylon Pentachloro, moves into the monsters corrupted by the Steel Swarm, as we see the predominant white color change into a steely gray. What's more interesting is that it seems to be the corruption of the Steel Swarm monsters change it from Vylon Tetra, a 3-dimensional shape, to a 4-dimensional one in Petrochlora. It makes it even more inhuman, the angles and shapes seeming to twist it among themselves, and I love how this sacrifices even the semblance of any human features, with the eyes and roughly humanoid arms going for sharp grabbing claws and a sun-like disc on its head. It makes it seem so much more other, like more supernatural, non-human elements were emphasized by their corruption. Their arms are another element I enjoy, seeming to phase through the center parts, showing the intangibility of a monster that moves in the 4th dimension. It's a really nice card, and the background helps as well, the green-black light contrasting it with the black and gold very well, and the sickly light showing how this differs from the more naturalistic tones of the previous monsters. It looks dissonant, and it should feel that way, given that this is a corruption of Vylon ideals and purpose into an agent of pure destruction. I like how the background ties in with later Greek analogy, as the name pentachloro, not only being a word to represent the four-dimensional pentachloron, contains the word chloro, which is Greek for green. The effect is really nice as well, allowing for a more aggressive take, which makes sense when considering the corruption it suffered. The attack and defense, once again, references its geometrical origins, the card having 500 attack and 400 defense to match the 5 vertices and 4 sides of a pentachloron. In the end, a truly excellent card, a clear 8 out of 10. While it doesn't go high enough, or interesting enough for me at least, to hit the 9 out of 10 and the 10 out of 10 categories, it does do a very, very good job in making an interesting card to look at. Their next card, Vylon Tesseract, is good for a lot of the same reasons as Pentachloro. It's a corrupted and upgraded version of Vylon Cube, with multiple cubes contained inside of it, showing its fourth-dimensional nature. Its hands has 4 claws, referencing the number of sides of a square. It looks inhuman and menacing. The hands seem to come from within the formless black hole of the Tesseract, and it looks menacingly inhuman, without eyes or any of the other features that tend to humanize these otherwise inhuman mechanical angels. The background is deep blue with digital effects and black starburst, helping to emphasize its inhumanity. As opposed to the clouds of the other ones, it goes for a digital pattern, emphasizing its inhumanity. Once again, the attack and defense spread are references to the vertices and faces of a tesseract. The effect works as an upgraded form of cubes, allowing you to summon out a Vylon monster rather than just an equip spell, the aggressive nature of the effect matching the corrupted nature. For many of the same reasons that Vylon Pentachlora gets an 8 out of 10, this does as well. Their next card, Vylon Charger, is part of a trio of monsters that break theming with the rest of the archetype, and therefore already stack up pretty poorly. They lack a lot of the explicit reference to three-dimensional shapes, and beyond that, can't even be bothered to take on a set of appearances that makes them mostly consistent within their own little bubble. On the other hand, they're almost entirely good cards within their own right. It creates somewhat of an interesting dilemma for me, where I have a set of cards that, if they were more consistent, I would lavish with praise and adoration until the cows come home. But I can't, because they fail to match with so many of the other surrounding cards and break theming. In any case, Vylon Charger is the first one, and a pretty interesting card all things considered, with a unique design and art that matches extremely well with the effect. The thing is, it could have been so easy to change it to Vylon Cylinder to match with the theming, so that irritates me as well. I like the design of the concentric rings of halos, and the design of the mask on the head makes it look vaguely intimidating. The angle we see it from helps with this as well, looming over the battlefield as light spills from its underbelly. The background for this card is amazing, with the light from on high to make it look like a descending angel, while the clouds around it part in circles in order to emphasize the shape. The effect is really nice as well, with it charging your other monsters by the number of equip cards it has, increasing its attack and with more power, allowing you to power up more of your monsters. I like a lot of the elements about this card. Normally it would get a 7 out of 10 or something similar, but considering its divergence from theme, it can only really get a 5 out of 10. I really like an archetype to be well themed and formed around certain conventions, and the fact that near every other Vylon card has some reference to geometry or mathematical notation makes these ones stand out all the more. The next card, Vylon Ohm, is a reference to Ohm's law, that the electrical current is proportional to the voltage and inversely proportional to the resistance. It's a really nice card that manages to match up with the more mechanical theming of the Vylon monsters, in this case, instead of geometry, being much more closely linked with their mechanical nature. I really like the design on this one. It being predominantly gold or white is nice, considering that other Vylon monsters almost always have some variant of crystal, and while there is a splotch of green on the shield on Ohm's bottom, it doesn't really show up across the rest of the card. The green is a nice green though, deeper than the other ones that have shown up in the past, and therefore is much better, helping to add a spot of needed color to the center of the shield without making the surrounding colors seem washed out. The design once again is pretty cool, the shield on the bottom acting as a mobile defense, while the arms charge up for a barrage of attacks. There is somewhat of an argument to be made that this additionally represents the omega symbol, which is present in the notation of Ohm's law, and that the arms, if transplanted down towards the end of the body, could form the arms, but I don't really buy it. Greek letters are usually assigned towards the extra deck, and I don't think it really works. The background is nice as well. The clear blue sky contrasts well with the figure and helps it to give it a real sense of freedom. The effect is fine enough and may relate to the name, with the ability of the monster to recur equip skulls being somewhat similar to an inversely proportional current. Ish. That was a pretty major reach though, so it doesn't count for much in the final grade. Said grade in the end is 5 out of 10. Normally, given my mostly positive review, would be something closer to a 6 or maybe even a 7, but the fact that I had to reach really hard to try and find something that maybe the effect could translate to, and my general distaste for cards that don't strictly adhere to the theme of the monsters, in this case, I would have much preferred if this was directly a reference to a geometrical shape of some kind, means that this card can only get a 5 out of 10. The next monster is Vylon Vanguard, a somewhat interesting take on a more overtly humanoid appearance for a monster, at least for the Vylon archetype. For what it's worth, this little quartet of monsters, Charger, Ohm, Soldier, and Vanguard, do try at least to share some sort of basic internal theme. I'm sure they're meant to be the more regular forces of the Vylons and therefore have features to match. Charger is in the backline, so it looks like a support tower at first, and Vanguard, Soldier, and Ohm all seem to be more frontline fighters, Vanguard and Soldier especially having massive pauldrons, enhancing the profile and making them seem more important by virtue of what I like to call the 40k World of Warcraft effect. And in Vanguard's case, the slimmer body in general, along with a lightning bolt-shaped bottom, all seem to work to imply speed. The angle from which we see the card helps as well, with it seeming to rise up out of the ether towards us. The accent colors, going back to the pale green at this time, are once again not my favorite. I think that it really washes out the purity of the white and gold and seems to dilute it, making it seem more sickly or faded than anything else. The effect is really nice, it allowing you to draw cards when it's destroyed by battle equal to the number of equip cards it had on it. It's really nice, reflecting the role of the Vanguard to engage the enemy quickly and decisively, and rewards you for doing so by allowing you to go deeper into your resources. It's a nice card with some unfortunate elements, it mainly being disconnected from the rest of the theme, but sadly, these elements do have a pretty large impact in my enjoyment of this art as a whole, so it gets another 4 out of 10. Again, there are some elements I really like in this card, but it's so disconnected from the rest of the archetype. It has little to no relation to even mathematical notation like Ohm had, so in the end, it can't get more than a 4 out of 5 in my opinion. Vylon Prism, on the other hand, is a card that, once again, while it does somewhat deviate from the expected norm, does so with a flair that manages to compensate for many of its deficiencies. It's a Thunder type, or even instead of a machine or even fairy, the one and only in the entire archetype, and unfortunately, for some of the card, takes the pale green color that I really don't like in this archetype. However, it is probably one of the more overtly angelic cards, despite being one of the less humanoid monsters. The pauldrons help a lot, being blocky, solid pieces which give way to my favorite element of the card, the glass that comes down from the center of its body and sides of the pauldrons. On the side of the pauldrons, they start to evoke wings, especially with the way the background clouds seem to curve around it. The effect is subtle, but it is there, and I love the design of the glass, like I said before, and it matches surprisingly well with the thunder typing, seeming to crackle with lightning and jagged ice. It's an amazingly cool element of the card and does a lot to mitigate my dislike of certain elements, like the color. Its pose is also pretty nice, in sync with the effect, which I'll talk about next, and the typing. It's a bold pose, arms out and low but ready to fight, the head on an angle that implies a confrontational nature that helps bring out the card's aggressiveness. The effect is really nice, keeping with the typing, allowing the monster that this is equipped to gain attack during the damage step, supercharging it with the thunder typing. In the end, a 6 out of 10. An excellent card with some elements I really enjoy despite some elements I really don't like. The reason that this doesn't get as low of a grade as something like Vanguard is that it does at least keep the theme with regards to the geometrical type. It's a prism, and that is close enough that I don't knock it for that. Returning back to a theme that will be prominent with later monsters, we'll go with Vylon's Stigma. Itself is a reference to sigma or a diagamma, an ancient Greek numerical reference for 6. In keeping with its theme, it has 6 spikes on the mask, and assuming it keeps symmetricity, 6 orbs on the pauldrons. I like the name in another sense as well. The common usage of the word stigma now refers to something that has a social cost associated with, something stigmatized. Considering that from all points of view this seems to be a corrupted Vylon given the darker metal and banding around the arms, along with the ornate gold mask, it seems to work, it being stigmatized amongst other Vylon monsters, for being different and corrupted by the steel swarms. I like the galaxy at its feet, and the orange starbursts help to break it up a little, and make the card a tad more interesting, showing how the corrupted Vylons wish to exterminate all life. I like how the entire body is shaped like the letter stigma in Greek, and the scalloped sloping design along with the impersonal golden mask make it seem much more interesting. I love how they chose to use the gold in this one, making it seem much more like armor for the monster rather than part of the body. The effect is somewhat lackluster, being equip related, but not thematically converging with the card to any great degree. In the end, it gets a 6 out of 10. While I like the design, it needed a bit more of a relevant effect to reach the higher ratings. And while normally I would say that it's slightly weird considering that it wants to be a reference to Greek letters when that's more usually used for the synchro monsters, I'd say that considering its corrupted nature, it works well enough with the rest of them to make sense. Vylons Soldier is another one of the quartet of regular or more humanoidish monsters. The design once again works pretty well and lacks the green that so plagued the other cards, and while I'm not a huge fan of the purple either, it doesn't take over this card to the extent the green did on Vanguard. In this card, while purple is clearly the background of the card, corresponding with the gems in the center, it doesn't overtake the card in a way that messes it up, nor does the color of the purple background seem too pale as to wash out the rest of the colors, as was my issue with the pale green. The design of Soldier itself is really nice, reflecting the combative nature with its massive pauldron and thick, trunk-like arms. It makes it seem heavier than a lot of the other Vylon monsters, and therefore much more able to engage in direct combat. I like as well how they use the black stripe to separate the neck and head from the rest of the card, showing us clearly where it is while also emphasizing its lack of size relative to the shoulders and the arms, the intensely physical aspects of the card. It's further emphasized with the lack of legs, the entire card being shaped triangularly in an alien effort to mimic the physique of a strongman with broad shoulders. It's a nice touch for the card, and one I enjoy when considering how they were designed. The effect is once again very thematic, allowing you to manipulate the position of monsters on the field up to the number of equipped cards it has, a battle-oriented effect which helps to make the card seem combative. Beyond that, it also has a thematic reference to the Steel Swarm archetype, which this was originally designed to fight, the Steel Swarms all having 0 defense. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 10. While internally it has a very strong thematic underpinning, it lacks connection to the rest of the archetype that really makes me want to give it a higher score. The final of their regular monsters is Vylon Hept, another geometrical reference, this time to a heptagon, a shape with 7 sides. Fortunately, almost nothing about the card reflects that design, with the general shape looking like a rhombus more than anything else, with the attack and defense in no way representative of the number of vertices or sides. It's supremely disappointing, especially because this ends up looking more like Soldier and other monsters than looking at like anything with a specific geometrical theme. The design itself is fair enough, the big blocky shapes helping the monster to look sufficiently intimidating, and I like the suggestion of golden wings on its back. If you had to color grade a card, you could do worse than gold, I suppose, especially given the Vylon color scheme. The background is fair enough, with a gold cloud swirling around the monster as it arises from a summoning point, but it just doesn't do enough to be a whole lot different. In the end, it lacks a lot of a clear link between the name and design, and while it does technically fit into the theme of the other monsters, it does so on a bare technicality. The effect has little link to the card overall, allowing you to summon out another monster that was acting as an equip card, which is once again fairly disappointing. This card is more disappointing than anything else. Rather than the interesting designs centered around various shapes, they went with continuing the utterly strange concept of the more humanoid angel figures. I liked it when they went absolutely bonkers with the strange, barely humanoid designs. It made them seem a lot more like angels from the actual Bible. Less cherubic youths and golden harp-playing wusses, but incomprehensible alien figures made up of various animals exclaiming the glory of God in frightening voices. In the end, this card disappoints beyond anything else, and can only receive a 3 out of 10. While it does technically fit in with the theme, it does so with barest lip service, and that's more insulting than a card which is technically competent, but lacks thematic relevancy. Moving on to their extra deck monsters, we follow the Greek alphabet to determine order, which means we get to start off with Vylon Alpha. I love this card. It combines everything I like about the Vylon monsters, the intricate links between the name and the monster design, and the gorgeous background. This monster design obviously reflects the name of the card, with a massive gold frame on its back looking like a capital Alpha, while the monster viewed from the side appears to be a small alpha. The frame also appears to be an astrographical sextant of some kind, which, considering that they were built by the Constellars, makes a lot of sense. The golden line in the center of Alpha's chest is a reference to the fact that Greek letters often also correspond to numbers, in this case, Alpha corresponding to 1. A dahoy there. It's a really nice touch. The links just don't end there though, with the defense being 1100 and the attack merely doubled. I like the fact that we see this card from a slightly lower angle, seeming to just loom over us enough to feel intimidating, with the wings helping to compensate for the lack of legs, looming around the card protectively, and the black edging to help to make sure that it doesn't seem too organic, just mechanical enough to be alien to us. It's a masterclass in good design, and I really love how it all comes together to create this slightly intimidating, utterly gorgeous card. The effect is fine enough, allowing it to protect itself from most things if it has an equip card on it, and giving it a measure of protection. This helps to sync up with the design most of all, the wings curved around it protectively in order to keep it safe. The background is lovely, just moving from the dark of night to the pink of dawn, heralding the arrival of an angelic host and the start of a new day. This card is amazing, a clear 9 out of 10. Vylon Delta is the next card up, another great card with an even better effect. The design is much more aggressive, the sharp angles of the delta symbol represented with a wireframe on its back and the wings curled over the arms, their points extending down to the bottom of the card. It's a nice touch which helps to make the card seem more aggressive looking along with the arms held in a flexing position. The entire design of the card is downwards pointing as well, from the line of concentric rings around the flare at the bottom of the card, and the Roman numeral for 4 rearranged is to form an arrow pointing down. It helps to streamline the card and give it a very palpable sense of direction. There's one direction you are going, and it is down, and such like. The background is stunning, the chaotic red and black sky pierced by glimmering lines of gold, the Vylons descending upon a world torn by conflict in order to order it with existence with the wishes of their ancient programming, scouring the world with fire and fury. The effect once again is really nice this time, allowing you to add an equip spell from the deck to your hand if it's in defense position. Why the effect is so good is because the defense value, in this case 2800, is a multiple of 4, the same number that Delta represents in the ancient Greek alphabet. It creates a really nice thematic link, and for that and the incredible design, it gets a 10 out of 10. Vylon Ellipson is the next card, carrying on the themes of previous cards. Like the rest, it has an utterly alien design reminiscent of the letter it resembles. While lacking the wireframe letter in the back, it makes up for it with ellipson-shaped armbands, and the wireframe this time has, judging from the spacing, 5 points, which makes sense given the fact that according to the internet and the Roman numeral on its chest, it has an association with the number 5. The color scheme works once again, the pose and effect helping to give it more meaning. The harsh golden light in the background works with its almost contemptuous pose, hand extended out to the side as if to absent-mindedly smite the viewer. The black and gray with its wings help to cut across the stark gold background, lending this card a more ominous air as it drifts across the landscape, form towering over others. It syncs up really well with the effect in this case, allowing you to destroy equip cards in order to blast opposing monsters from the existence. It's a trifecta that works really well, and therefore another 10 out of 10. I love seeing cards like this from the synchro monsters that work so well in both establishing a theme and common elements shared by all of them, but also do such good work in creating unique designs for each monster. What more can I say about Vylon Sigma other than that it once again holds to many of the conventions that make the others good, with just enough different that I can really appreciate it. You're probably a little sick of me reiterating the same points over and over again, so I'll work through them really quickly so we can get to the fun stuff. The shape of the body, like ellipson, is once again the shape of the letter, the body representing a backwards sigma. The bands on its arms do their best to represent a stylized version of the lowercase sigma. The attack and defense values are once again reflections of some aspect of the card, the defense being a multiple of 200, representing sigma's numerical value of 200, while the 1800 attack represents the fact that this is the 18th letter of the Greek alphabet. The background is actually a little disappointing this time, being a blue blob of strings rather than the open sky of the rest. I would have liked to see something relating to that, as it would help keep in theme with the rest. The effect is also quite nice this time, not hurting the card but not thematically fitting with it either. I would have liked to see maybe something relating to attack boosting or attack stealing, relating to Sigma's mathematical function as a summation operator. In the end, it's an 8 out of 10, a very good card, but with some minor things that could have been improved on to make it much, much better. Vylon Omega is their last synchro monster, and a fitting way to end the archetype in so many ways. We're back to the gold wireframing for the symbol in the body, just like Alpha, when looked at from the side might be comparable to the lowercase omega symbol. The number 24 shows up a lot around the card as well, making sense considering it's the last letter of the Greek alphabet. There are 24 violet spikes around the card, and while initially that you could say that the 2 X's on its chest, representing Roman numerals for 20, are in error, considering the number would have to be 24, it works if it's a bit of a reach and count the bars that make up the X's as 1s, allowing for 24. The attack is a multiple of 800, a reference to the fact that numerical values of omega is 800. Beyond that, it helps to act as a mirror of Steelswarm Hercules, not only being a monster that requires 3 others to make like Hercules, but a level 10 monster with 3200 attack, fitting considering its purpose was to combat the Steelswarm. The effect also is very interesting, being almost a mirror of Alpha just for monsters effect. It also matches with the lore as well, given that it was meant to fight Steelswarms, a deck reliant on the normal summon, and its initial effect to banish normal summoned or set monsters would be devastating against it. Another interesting thing to note is that if one put the effects of Alpha and Omega together, they would uncover the entire range of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Spells, monsters, and traps. This means that Alpha and Omega, a common title for God in Christianity, would have power over the entire spectrum of all Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. That's a really cool aspect, and for that and many other reasons, it being an excellent card altogether, it gets a clear 10 out of 10, an amazing card. The design is actually also very interesting. Just as a quick aside before we go, there's almost no white on this card, which is strange for Vylon monsters. In fact, looking on it, there's actually been steadily less white on a lot of the cards as we've been going along. From the little quartet of monsters, which would probably be the regular forces, to the monsters that they created in order to help combat the Steelswarms, it's almost like they're slowly losing the white that makes them the Vylons and slowly getting corrupted. Vylon Die Sigma, Destroyer, Corruptor. It takes everything even remotely comforting about the design of the other Vylon monsters and turns it into pure menace, inverting the predominantly white color scheme of the previous cards, turning everything to blackness instead, and represents a fusion of the corrupted Vylon monsters, Stigma making up its head, Pentachlora the thorax, and Tesseract at the bottom. This card is designed to be menacing, from the sharp, deadly-looking wings to the rings of red gems around the death-like human face to the sharp clawed arms, everything in direct violation of the common design palette for the other monsters, and for that, it is amazing. The hellish red and black glow in the background moves away even from the skies that characterize the backgrounds of other cards, moving for a discordant and hellish glow as it forces its way into the world. The fact that it's an Exceeds as well, rather than a Synchro, is able to display the corrupted nature of the card, a different type of extra deck monster to the rest of them. The name even does all it can to show how different it is. Die Sigma, the unused 25th letter of the Greek alphabet. The attack values have some relevance, and 2500 attack being a connection to its status as the 25th letter. The effect is once again amazing. It forcibly equipping monsters to the card, rather than Vylon monsters naturally being attached to their other monsters as they are destroyed themselves. Everything about this card is anathema to the common design amongst the Vylons, and considering it's meant to represent a massive corruption of their other monsters, how can I give it anything other than a 10 out of 10? Some very interesting things to note about the Vylon spells is that they actually have some connection towards the Constellars, more specifically Constellar Pleiades, which has a very close synergy with the Vylon archetype. If we take the 7 Vylon spells to be 7 Vylon stars, as it were, we get the same number of stars that are in the actual constellation Pleiades, known as the Seven Sisters. Sadly, the spells in general lack a lot of the thematic underpinning that would otherwise ground them like the extra deck monsters. Noting that, let's quickly move past the only normal spell card of Vylon Matter. It appears to be a deactivated version of a later card and allows you to return spells from your graveyard to your deck, and if so, allows you to draw a card to destroy an opponent's. The art for this card is fine enough, the design is fair with the dark blue contrasting the gold well, and both standing out from the red background. I do question the use of the red background somewhat, as it's usually used to represent a more aggressive or corrupted version of Vylon monsters. I like the effects of the card, however, the bright sparkle off the edge of the gold and the wind swirling around it hinting at some future power. In the end, it's a fine enough card. It gets a 4 out of 10. It's honestly a little subpar. The name doesn't seem to link particularly well with either the content of the art or the effect itself, so in the end, it's just slightly mediocre. Vylon Polytype is a quick play spell, and a really interesting one when it comes to the mathematical implications of the cards. A polytope is an object with flat sides, which may exist in multiple dimensions. This works for Vylons, considering that the regular monsters seem to both exist in 3 dimensions, like Tetra and Sphere, as well as in 4 dimensions, with the corrupted versions like Tesseract and Pentachloro. The art itself attempts to show the more esoteric meaning of the card, the golden loop seeming to fold in on itself, while the spikes to the back send off strange ways that are meant to make it seem more exotic. I like the details though, they help to make the card seem more than just a golden loop. The blue ball in the center is a slight issue though, given that it blends in a bit too well with the background, which is also pretty blue. It's distinguished somewhat by the white light in the middle, but it still blends a bit too much to be well differentiated, in my opinion. The effect is really nice, actually, referencing polytomy, which is the process of dividing up a larger thing into smaller things, in this case, dividing a larger Vylon monster into much smaller ones. It's a decent card overall, so this one gets a 5 out of 5. Perfectly average. Vylon Element is a card with some serious lore implications and a really cool link between the art and effect. The design is once again really nice, with the concentric rings forming a massive portal in the middle. The swirling colors in the middle of the portal and the crackling green lightning all work to give it a sense of mad sciencey goodness. Apart from that, the background is once again pretty nice. I'll always prefer actual backgrounds to random gradients, and the effect is where we start to get into the lore implications. According to the lore, Element was given to the other tribes for the summon of various combination monsters in order to help and combat the Steel Swarm monsters. This makes a lot of sense, adding the Vylon element, as it were, in order to create more powerful combinations. This matches somewhat with the effect, as it allows you to summon out Vylon tuner monsters from the portal in order to make more monsters. Issue is that the card restricts you to summoning out Vylon monsters, but that could also maybe mean that because this card is used in the lore to summon Vylon Omega. I really like how it links to that lore. The design itself is good enough. In the end, it's a 6 out of 10. Nothing too spectacular, but slightly above average given its potent lore connection. If there's one thing you can say about the theme of the equip cards is that if the monsters were based around geometry and the extra deck around Greek letters, then you could maybe say that they take more mechanical element of the Vylons into account. We'll start off in this case with Vylon Component. The art for this one is good, with a striking design from the start. I like the sleek design giving way to sharp points. It shows the aggressiveness of the card and matches well with the overall aesthetic of the Vylons. The color grading this time is actually quite nice, the purple managing to keep the card looking visually interesting, while the gems work well with the gold and white. I like the effect as well, the lightning crackling everywhere, and the tight ball in the middle showing off the power of the card. The background is nice, the clouds almost seeming to flee from the card, seeming to part before its might, and the piercing effect, the actual effect of the card, not the effects present around it, is really cool. The piercing effect works if you consider that most of Vylon monsters were meant to combat the Steel Swarms, as most of the monsters have zero defense, as I mentioned before. In the end, another pretty nice card with a fun link between the effect and lore that brings it up to a 6 out of 10. Vylon Filament is their next card and looks pretty good. Once again, the art matches the sleek gold color scheme and design that characterizes the Vylons, and the colored gems in the card seem to match really well with the effect. There's not much to say about the art this time around. I like the fact that I could see it actually equipping onto the various Vylon monsters, just slotting into various points, and I like the jointed design for the crystals. It's a nice touch when it makes it seem like they would attach at some point to the back, springing up to loom over the shoulders in some way. I like the symmetrical spacing and lightning colliding in the middle, mostly because I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. The effect matches well with the art, the spell and trap resistance maybe being indicated by the color of the green and purple gems, the color of spell and trap cards in the game. The background is actually quite nice for this one, and the gray allowing the golden colors to really pop this time. It gets a 6 out of 10. Again, good, but not exceptional in any way. Vylon Material is probably the most boring of the Vylon spells, mostly because it's just a spike. It's a nicely ornate spike with some flashy things on it, but in the end, spike is just a spike. Background is fair enough, with clouds parting and a flare effect to highlight it, and its effect is probably the most boring, merely being an attack boost. If I speak about this anymore, I'm honestly afraid that my vocal cords are gonna fall asleep, so 4 out of 10, nothing too great, but nothing really bad either, so yeah, let's just move on. Vylon's Segment is their final card, and the most interesting one of their equip cards. It shows an activated Vylon mana with electricity running down the prongs and a concave shield extending out from the gem. I really like it, the center of the card being black contrasts nicely with the gold, and the shield is a nice touch that adds something to the card. I like the little hole in the top of the black gem as well. It seems to be an emitter of some kind for the shield. The background is really nice, pretty good. The light burst behind the shield adds some motion and flair to the card, which I like. The effect is also really good as well, protecting your monster from the monster or trap effects, and it makes sense given the shield-like design, allowing it to protect itself from being destroyed or interacted with in many ways. This card gets a 6 out of 10, a good card, but lacking once again anything that really makes me think it deserves a higher score. So, to sum it all up, Vylons are a generally excellent archetype. They peak with their extra deck monsters, which are all magnificent in various ways. Their spells are probably the weakest cards in the archetype, lacking a clear theme that really unifies them beyond some possible connections to the Constellar line. I really like how they chose to take this mechanical, angelic sort of thing, and I love the inhumanity of these monsters, these barely human elements, just to make them slightly identifiable, but so alien in their other aspects. Like I said before, it really seems to fit the portrayal of angels in the Bible, which were not human-like. They were crazy mishmashes of incredible animals fused together, and this, while not being as organic as that, still attempts to evoke that inhumanity through their mechanical nature. My card of the archetype has to be Vylon Omega, mostly because it's the ultimate boss monster of the line, and especially in terms of how it relates to the lore, is really cool, as well as all the allusions it has to God and everything else. To be fair, there were multiple monsters in this archetype that could have tried, but Omega seemed the most fitting to me and the most grand. In the end, this archetype as a whole gets an 8 out of 10. While they have some excellent cards, they also suffer from a lack of consistent theming in their spells, as well as some relative duds with their monsters that would prevent me from giving this a higher score, like a 9 or maybe even a 10 out of 10. So, that's all for this video. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos. And without further ado, this is Nuke, signing out.